How you guys all doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Mardiege. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd, down another week in the NFL regular season after the conclusion of Week 7 last night, with the return of the doubleheaders on Monday Night Football. We got two very different looking games, but still we're going to review both of them in today's show. Starting off with the more entertaining one, you could say, the Baltimore Ravens and the Buccaneers combined for 72 points last night. So very entertaining game from that standpoint. We're going to talk about what we learned from that game in today's show, plus the Cardinals and the Chargers. Very opposite end of the spectrum, but still some things we can learn from that as well, plus some more storylines in the NFL, looking at the Texans and Packers game, plus the Chiefs and the 49ers game as well. On top of touching the Deshaun Watson injury as well. We didn't really get a chance to talk about that. So all of that is all going to come up on today's show. Make sure to stick around. But before we get going, I want to remind you guys, if you want to be part of the show and state any opinion, question, or comment you just like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. We always want to hear your input, and your insight is a big part of what makes this show great. So we thrive on your energy and insights, whether or not you guys want to participate, but also when you do, there's an easy way to go about it now, just by using the new Super Chat feature that we have available to you guys. Just by clicking the $sign at the bottom of the chat box, you can send in your Super Chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, use the new Super Chat feature, get involved with the show, and let me know what's on your mind on any of the topics we talk about on today's show and also going forward. But with that now being the case, we can officially look at the totality of Week 7 because it culminated last night, and this game between the Ravens and the Bucs was certainly one that I'm sure a lot more people were, I guess, looking forward to. And, I mean, I was switching between both games, so this one definitely had a lot more, I think, just all over the board, just from the amount of touchdowns and points that there were, plus the storylines going forward. It really had almost everything. And the scoreboard, the difference in the scoreboard only had a 10-point margin, but it felt like it was a bit more dominating by the Ravens, at least from my point of view, because the Ravens won on the road, like I said, 41-31, to win their 5th game in a row, while the Buccaneers fall to 4-3 now, and they continue to alternate between wins and losses over the last couple weeks. You know, it's been week to week now that they've won a game, then they've lost the game, then they won the other one, and things like that. It's really been going on since Week 3, where they lost to the Broncos, then they beat the Eagles, then they lost to the Falcons, then they beat the Saints, and now they lose to the Baltimore Ravens. So it's screaming of inconsistency right now, and you get that a few times when maybe you're not the most well-balanced team, but I feel like this Bucs team really relies on their offense, and I'm a big fan of their offense just because of, you know, the weapons that they have and the great job that Liam Cohen is doing, their new offensive coordinator as well. But that certainly could have taken a hit. It certainly did take a hit last night with the injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but we're going to talk about that impact a little bit later. But more on the game now. Lamar, a great individual performance last night. Now he's 23-1 against NFC teams, and he's 3-0 against the Buccaneers after a very dominating performance individually, but of course as well for the Ravens as a team. Like I said before, the Buccaneers continue to show their offensive firepower, but like we mentioned in the preview, right, leading up to this game, I went with the Ravens just because even though these two offenses might be two of the most high scoring in the NFL, it's still a case where the defense, when you match up so well with another team, you gotta find somewhere that it differentiates both of you. And you know, you look at the receivers, you can go 1-for-1. Maybe the Bucs are better. The running backs, you could give it to the Ravens. The quarterbacks, the Ravens as well. And once you go down the line like that and it matches up pretty well, you got to find some sort of different factor that separates you. And I felt like the Ravens had a bit more of those it factor playmakers on defense to really make a difference. And we saw it last night where they were going, the game was still pretty much in hand, but it was those 2 interceptions by Baker that allowed the Ravens to just continue scoring while they stopped the Buccaneers. And when you get a score or 2 back behind the Ravens, they're probably the best team at closing teams out because of Derrick Henry. So the margin of error against the Baltimore Ravens is so thin that even a mistake or 2 turnovers, certainly like this, are end up being the difference in this game. And I think it's going to be the case for a lot of teams going forward. And it shows what kind of level the Ravens are playing at as well. But speaking of those performances that we saw last night, we had to bring up Lamar just because he played as complete a game as you would have liked. He was 17 of 22, 281 yards, 5 touchdowns on the day. He added 52 rushing yards on 9 carries. Also, Derrick Henry doing more Derrick Henry things, 169 rushing yards on only 15 carries. And receiving-wise, Rashad Bateman had the biggest day. He had 4 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown, while Mark Andrews scored 2 touchdowns to add on to that as well. And on the other side, Baker Mayfield almost threw for 400 yards. He had 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And running-wise, Rachaad White only had 40 yards, but he did a lot in the passing game, adding 71 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns as well. And Cade Otton, their tight end, finished with 8 receptions for 100 yards as well. And the receivers, Mike Evans only had 1 catch, ended up being a touchdown on that first drive before he got hurt. And Chris Godwin was having a pretty solid game, but of course, unfortunately, he got hurt with like a minute left. So we're going to touch on that in just a few seconds. But we got to get to the game and how it all broke down a little bit here, because I thought it was pretty interesting how just through the course of this game, through this breakdown, that you could see where like the Ravens, you stopped them initially. That's what the Buccaneers did. They managed to slow them out out of the gate in this contest. And there was only 1 punt in the first half, and the Buccaneers scored a touchdown on their first drive to Mike Evans, making it 7-0. But then after that, it looked like the Buccaneers scored again, but they ruled it off, so they settled for a field goal, still only 10-0. And then after that, the Baltimore Ravens punted. That was the only punt of the first half. And then from that point on, it really took a turn, because as soon as Baltimore scored a touchdown to make it 10-7, you couldn't hold them off for too long before they got up on the board. Then it became a problem when the Buccaneers threw 2 bad interceptions, while the Ravens, as soon as they got that first touchdown, they got another touchdown and a field goal right after that. After those 2 interceptions, they got a touchdown after one and a field goal after the other. And then in a blink of an eye, now they're leading 17-10, and they're taking that lead into halftime as well. So the Buccaneers, you're not really out of it that much. You're playing at home, you're only down a touchdown, but you really got to start kicking things into gear. And then in the second half, the difference grew even more, because after the Ravens got another field goal to make it 20-10, and the Buccaneers missed a field goal, which is another missed opportunity, you're already, losing the turnover battle. So to lose another opportunity because you missed a field goal, obviously unintentional, but still, you would have kept the margin of the scoreboard pretty much the same. But because you didn't, Baltimore scored 2 more touchdowns right after that, and again, in just a blink of an eye, the score is 34-10, and the Buccaneers are now down 24 points instead of, I don't know, maybe it probably would have been like 14 or a little bit closer than that if they scored a field goal, or if they maybe got a touchdown in one of these other drives. But at 34-10, the game, no one's going to admit it, but it's pretty much over at that point, because it does depend who's playing in this game, right? If you got the Ravens, the Chiefs, or the Lions in another case, if they're up 34-10, if they're up 24 points, you're not going to come back on them regardless of like what team it is, unless it's one of these other great teams. If it's anything less than that, the game is pretty much over from there. But the last 6 possessions were pretty much a free-for-all in this game, because there was 3 touchdowns from the Buccaneers, who still had their starters in pretty much the entire game. And still, 1 touchdown from the Ravens as well throughout the entire course of those 6 possessions. So the score ended up being 41-31 ultimately. But the last few possessions, it just felt like it didn't matter. I don't know. That might have just been me, but I never really felt like the Buccaneers were ever going to come back, or that the Ravens, they've kind of been known to give up some of these big leads. I never felt like that because of the injuries that we mentioned, right, to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And those are the biggest storylines going forward now, because the Ravens, there's not too much to say about them other than maybe cleaning up that defense a little bit more. But still, it's hard to improve on what they're doing offensively. Maybe the penalties, a lot of holding calls last night, but still, when you put up 41 points, it's hard to say you need to definitely get better at this or that. So the Ravens are fine. They're going to continue to beat teams. But the Bucs, it's looking a little bit dicey because Chris Godwin dislocates his ankle on pretty much the last play of the game, and it looks like his season is pretty much over because of that injury, to add on to Mike Evans, who re-aggravated his hamstring injury, and now the reports are saying he's not expected back until after their Week 11 bye week. So the next few weeks are going to be crucial for the Buccaneers. If they can somehow stay above water, it'll be huge. But, they have some tough games coming up. They're going to be at home in that rematch against the Atlanta Falcons. Then they have the Chiefs in Arrowhead before they host the San Francisco 49ers after that. And, we'll see where the record is at that point in time, because if they don't win more than a game, if they go 1-3 over the next couple of games, because they're already 4-3, and if they go 1-2, I should say, we're looking at about 5-5. And when Mike Evans comes back, and who knows what the other records are going to be, the NFC is very, very tight as it is. I don't know where 5-5 is going to get you ultimately for this Buccaneers team. And it's unfortunate because I really like the Bucs just because they do things very well on offense. They have everything clicking, it seems, and they have underrated players as well with Godwin and Evans and all that stuff. But we haven't really seen their defense be able to step up to the challenge. So that's really what worries me. But in the end, the Ravens win. They were the better team. I think we could just all agree on. So they get the win. They go to 5-2, and I believe now next week they have just as tough of a game, if I'm not mistaken. They play the Browns, so maybe never mind. But still, good showing for the Ravens. And speaking of great showings and great results, you got to talk about the other Monday Night Football game between the Chargers and the Cardinals. Not as exciting maybe, but still a very big win for the Cardinals to win it 17-15. We're going to go through all of that and give our thoughts and what did we learn from that game from both teams right after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get to our other game that we had last night on Monday Night Football. As part of that doubleheader that we saw last night, we had the Chargers and the Arizona Cardinals in the later kickoff at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. A interesting matchup for a couple reasons, right? Because these were two teams, like we said in the preview, that were very much still very far off from finding that breakthrough. I think there's still a lot to be desired from both of these teams, but they are on the correct path, I would say. They have some of the guys at some of the biggest positions on your team that you'd like to have figured out already. You know, the head coach, all their coordinators, I think, are very good. The quarterbacks, obviously, it's just about finding those, I guess, skill position players that really can make the difference in games like these, especially when maybe one part of your team isn't working or you need some sort of spark when just overall the team isn't looking great. You need guys like that to step up that can make the difference. And when you don't have those guys, you know, you get games like this, 17-15, and the Cardinals end up pulling away from the Chargers in this game. I predicted that the Chargers were going to win this game just because of the fact that I felt like they were going to have a bit more success against this Arizona Cardinals team, but that really wasn't the case. And, Arizona, with only its second home win after losing the last two home games for themselves, they now find themselves at 3-4, which isn't too bad considering how they've performed in some of these games. But the Chargers also dropped to 3-3 now, and it was really, I guess, not too surprising based on how low scoring it was, because I think it really reflects on their head coaches that they have going, where you look at Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator for the Eagles all those years, and how great of a job he did. And now he's the head coach of this Cardinals team, trying to build up that defense to the level that he would ideally want it. And you get sometimes performances like this from his defense that's able to hold opposing teams to 17 points. And Jim Harbaugh on the other side as well. You look at the job he did last year in Michigan, where they had a great defense, great at stopping the run, and just a lot of low-scoring games for the teams that he was facing, that he carries that over into the NFL, into his return to the NFL. He wants to build up from the defensive line, from the offensive line, and have a good defense and run the ball, and all those good stuff, all those good things you hear from Jim Harbaugh and a lot of the coaches that are successful. But they both, it was just a meeting of two teams that are just very reflective of each other, and that's why it was so close throughout the entire game. And it is unfortunately Jim Harbaugh's first loss on Monday Night Football, and I feel like this game really showed the lack of just difference makers, I guess, that this Chargers team has on offense. And much like the butt kicking that the Ravens gave the Bills, and how evident it was there that the Bills needed somebody else. They needed somebody to win in these one-on-one matchups, or at least scare the opposing defense to know that having him out there on one-on-one is not favorable for that defense. And the Chargers don't have that at this point, having to take some difficult decisions over the offseason, right? And maybe having to sacrifice Keenan and Mike Williams and having to make do with what they had. It's worked sometimes where the running game is very good, but other times, like this game, where the running game really never got going, you have a quarterback as talented as Justin Herbert. You need somebody there, at least one other guy, to be that go-to man. And Ladd McConkey, I think he's a good player, like very good for a rookie, but he was a little bit dinged up in this game, and still a rookie. You can't expect too much out of him just right out of the gate. So it became evident to me that, this game against the Cardinals, the Cardinals defense, like I said, with Jonathan Gannon, they can have good results. You look at the game against the 49ers, where the 49ers were scoreless in the entire second half, but to not score more than 15 points on this Cardinals team, I think that is a little bit overkill, right? They're not that good. All due respect to the Cardinals, they're not like a top 5, top 10 defense where they're holding teams to under 15. So I thought it was more reflective on the poor showing from the Chargers. And looking at the poor showing, in the running game, J.K. Dobbins having another lackluster performance, 40 yards through the ground. Last week he had 96 against Denver and they barely won, but this time he had less than half of that with only 40 yards. And in the passing game, again, you really there was a lot left to be desired, basically, because your leading receiver was Will Dissly, your tight end, with 8 receptions for 81 yards. But even still, those numbers are all right for a tight end, or they're very good for a tight end, I should say. But not when that guy is not when he's your number one receiver in an offense that still is lacking a number one guy, like talent-wise, right? Maybe if it's a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle or, I don't even know, like a Sam Laporta or something like that, then you could probably make do with that because you're still very well supplemented everywhere else. But the Chargers don't really have that. All that yardage was basically piled up to just get to the red zone. They never really did anything once they got there. And Ladd McConkey had 5 receptions for 46, and Joshua Palmer, similarly, 4 receptions for 63 yards as well. And on the other side, the Cardinals didn't really blow the roof off of the place either. Kyler Murray had 145 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And James Conner, in all fairness, he had 101 yards. He had some pretty big plays down the stretch as well. So he was probably their best player. It's still a little bit alarming that Marvin Harrison got 3 receptions for 21 yards. And I don't really think I've seen some people kind of start to give up on Marvin Harrison a little bit, or just start to, I don't know, I feel like send some more criticism his way, where obviously as a rookie, people just expect you to just jump off of the board like you've been playing in the NFL for the last 5 years. But Marvin Harrison, is still a rookie, he's still getting adjusted to everything, and he's already their best player. So really not having that veteran savviness to go out there and know how to, still benefit off of being the main target for an opposition's defense, and you're just a rookie and you're the best player, it doesn't really show up in the stat line where it's all based on the context around him, right? If he was maybe a couple years into the league, then maybe he could be criticized a little bit more, but this is still his first year. We're still 7 games into his NFL career, so I don't really hold that on him as much as it is just this Cardinals team isn't really built to scare you everywhere else, so why wouldn't you double Marvin Harrison Jr., right? So that's that. It's reflective of the score. And in the game, there wasn't too much offense to go around, obviously, from the scoreline. The Chargers started off the game. It appeared pretty well because they looked like they were about to score, but Justin Herbert hit a deep pass to Jalen Reagor, and just so weirdly, just so unexpectedly, he fumbles the ball, and it stays in bounds and kind of just rolls out of the back of the zone. It's so just like 0.001% of ever happening, but of course it happens to Jalen Reagor, right? He fumbles, it goes out of the back of the end zone, and they don't get any points off of it. That probably ended up being their best chance to score a touchdown all night, and they squandered it away. But still, it was Los Angeles that got on the board first. They managed to at least get 3 points first, but then Arizona responded right away with a touchdown of their own to Dortch, making it 3-7, and Los Angeles got another field goal in the first half to make it 6-7, which was the score going into halftime. And in the second half, it was pretty much a battle of just who wanted this win more, because there was a lot of ugly play, a lot of defensive stops, and more of the same from the first half, but it felt like more of a slugfest between two guys that are in the last round of a boxing match, right? Just trying to do whatever they can to just edge out their opponent. And this game, I never really felt confident in any of these two teams winning it convincingly, but somebody obviously had to win, right? And it was mostly defense showing up the majority of the second half. Still, the Chargers did take the lead, though, 9-7 with another field goal, but much like we saw in the first half, the Cardinals responded to that field goal with a touchdown of their own on that 44-yard run by Kyler Murray, and they take a 9-7 lead now. But the Chargers, very reluctant to go away. They scored 2 more field goals, and now they're up on the Cardinals 15-14. But the difference ultimately coming towards the end of the game, the Cardinals just had the ball last, and to their credit, they did a very good job of not squandering away the opportunity because there was still a lot of time left. They got the ball back with 1:54, and maybe they score too quickly or they go 3 and out and have to stop the Chargers and then get the ball back. But with significantly less time, they executed very well in this last drive with a lot of time left on their plate. They did get helped out a little bit with an unnecessary roughness call on, I want to say it was on Marvin Harrison that he got hit around the head area, I believe. So they did benefit from that, but also James Conner having one big play there, I think going for a 20 or something like that on a little screen pass that helped them get in better field position late in this game. And, they ultimately end up kicking the game-winning field goal and taking the lead 17-15 as time wound down. And now, after a game like that, what can you learn from it? To me, we already touched on the Chargers and how they just need, I don't know if they're going to trade for someone. I highly doubt they go out and get someone like a Hopkins, or, interestingly enough, Cooper Kupp is on the market now. Apparently, it looks like the Rams are going to be willing to hear offers for him, so he wouldn't have to move too far. But, that's sort of like a pipe dream. I don't think that would ever happen. But still, I don't think they'd get a guy like that. But it's still so evident that they need at least one guy that's just unquestionably a number one type of receiver, whether they draft one next year or maybe they trade for somebody to just help them out a little bit more. But I feel like they definitely need that. And with looking a bit more just around the Chargers and how badly they need a receiver, the Chargers had 8 drives in this game, and 5 were field goals, and all those drives except one that was 6 plays, the other 4 were at least 9+ play drives in which you have 9+ play drives, and for all of those to end just in 3 points, it's very demoralizing. Even though they had a chance to win this game, you ultimately end up losing on the defensive side of the ball, and the fact that you had so many chances to just score 1 touchdown, it's pretty alarming as well from that standpoint also. So that is something that they have to clean up, evidently, because this team is too talented. They have the quarterback position. Not a lot of teams say they have a franchise guy like Justin Herbert. So they have to figure it out sooner rather than later. And the Chargers have now gone 16 straight offensive drives without scoring a touchdown. And usually allowing 17 points in a game, much like the Cardinals the other way around, usually means you're going to win a game. That's just the basis of where offenses are now. And if you're not winning those type of games, then obviously you have to try and address that as soon as possible. But for the Cardinals, similarly, I like what Jonathan Gannon is doing. I think he's working very well with this defense. Despite the injuries, they have something there on the defensive side of the ball. Having a good coach masks a lot of those deficiencies that you have if they know what they're doing. But they too need somebody alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. with another great receiver, and you add it to this running game. I think you could definitely hurt a lot more teams than you're currently already doing, because James Conner hasn't been able to get going because they stack the box, knowing that they only really have to worry about Marvin Harrison. It's too simple for opposing defenses. So the quicker either of these teams get somebody else in there to help out Marvin Harrison or help out just anybody for the Chargers, it'll look a lot different. They're doing all right for what they have right now, so I'm not really too worried about them. But it was an interesting game to follow compared to the other ones, so we'll say that. But for right now, we're going to take a break from the recaps and touch on the Deshaun Watson injury, because it was confirmed that he was going to be out the remainder of 2024. But what does that mean for the Browns? Obviously, the remainder of this year, but going forward in 2025 and 2026, what are their options? What should they do? We're going to answer those questions in just a few seconds. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network. Now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now on the show to take a break from the reviews over the past weekend with all the great games that we had. We have to talk about one of the biggest developments from this past weekend in Week 7, and that was the Deshaun Watson injury. And, going into this game, talking about the Browns and how we painted the picture a little bit in predicting that they were going to lose to the Bengals. We knew going into that game that Cleveland had pretty much punted away their season. With trading away Amari Cooper, it wasn't screaming that they were going all in on this year, right? Like now, after trading our best player, now we're going to get serious and try and win these games, right? It doesn't make sense. So regardless of whether or not they were going to admit it, their actions spoke louder than what they were saying. So we knew what the circumstances were with this team. Now the way that Deshaun was playing and everything like that, there wasn't too much hope in this season. But now, all the talk that we will certainly have about this Cleveland Browns team just in the short term, we're going to have it about their future because of the confirmed news regarding Deshaun Watson and how he will be out the rest of 2024 with that Achilles injury. And it is devastating because apart from us critiquing him as a player, you don't like seeing him go down like that with an injury. And as soon as you saw it, of course there was those zoomed up images and zoomed up videos, but you saw it as soon as, or at least I thought, as soon as I saw him kind of step back on his foot and just collapse to the ground. Like I kind of assumed that it was an Achilles, and they got the card out for him as well, and he was very devastated. It was unfortunate to see. Of course, the fans booing him is a whole other topic that we're not going to touch on, but obviously it wasn't a great look for the Bengals, or not the Bengals, the Browns, and just honestly the fans for doing that to their own player, regardless of how bad he was. I do understand it is tough to see the bad performances, but the man just got injured, so to boo him while he's down, and clearly he was upset. It didn't really sit too well with me, but Cleveland, just sticking to the injury, put out a statement yesterday from their MRI scans, basically confirming the news, and he will be getting surgery, obviously, to repair his Achilles. But according to the reports that I thought were pretty interesting, he said he could decide, or it could be decided between two types of surgeries: the conventional surgery that usually has you out for I think it was like 7 to 8 months or something like that. That's the conventional sort of way of doing it, right? But there's this other method of still having that surgery, the newer speed bridge procedure that can lead to a faster return if Deshaun Watson decides to go that route. It's basically the procedure that Aaron Rodgers went through to get done on his Achilles last season, where he got hurt obviously the first week of the season, and he was almost ready to go very quickly just in general, but he was almost ready to go by the spring. It was like he wasn't hurt by the time he came back based on how quickly he was able to start up again. And that's an alternate option for Amari Cooper if he wants to get back quicker. But will it even matter if he just comes back earlier in the offseason or later in the offseason? I don't think it'd make too much of a difference, but those are the two options on the surgery and just what Deshaun Watson would like to do. But looking at this Browns team just overall, the question of what now with this team, right? Because short term, it's going to be Dorian Thompson Robinson or Jameis Winston in at quarterback. I know DTR got hurt a little bit in that game, so I don't specifically know what his injury diagnosis is or if he's going to be just fine, but maybe it'll be him, maybe it'll be Jameis Winston. That really doesn't hold too much substance because this Browns team, it's probably going to have a top draft pick, so that doesn't really matter too much for their future, because their future could get a little bit tricky because talking about Deshaun Watson and how still they have to make some pretty big decisions going forward, because now you look at this entire project with Deshaun, and now he's been hurt every year since joining this Cleveland Browns team. He played 6 games in 2022, he played 6 games in 2023, and now he's going to only be able to play 7 games, and now he's out the remainder of the year. Obviously, he was dealing with legal issues and suspensions and coming back from injuries in those other seasons, but regardless of the context of it, it's still not the payback you would want to have from giving up so much to the Houston Texans. And that's everything anyone's ever going to talk about with this trade, how much they got out of Deshaun compared to how much the Texans got out of all those trade picks that they got and how fast they were able to rebuild, get a guy like CJ, and build up that team with a lot of young players, pretty much setting them up for the next 10 years, while the Browns are still in the same hole trying to find their quarterback, right? Because it was Baker, then it wasn't. And now they put all their chips into the middle of the table trying to get Deshaun, and it hasn't really panned out as obviously as they would have thought it would. And all on, of course, the largely all the attention will, of course, now be on the contract as well, because as much as you gave up to the Houston Texans, the amount of money is also a major factor in all of this, because Deshaun Watson has the largest fully guaranteed contract, obviously, in NFL history. That 5-year, $230 million deal, again, all fully guaranteed before playing a snap. Now, looking back on it in hindsight, is obviously like a mistake, just short-term answer, but of course, the Browns would have never imagined something like this happening, and just over the course of the 3 years here, that this would have ever been a reality. But it's such a weird case, because other than the injuries, he just hasn't been playing well, and compared to what we saw in Houston, it's very odd to see. You don't really know what the reason could be behind it. It feels like there's more to it, but we're not going to speculate on that, just more so on the decisions that the Browns might have to make going forward based on the money of it all, because there are some things to consider here with Deshaun and how these decisions could affect the Cleveland Browns going forward. Looking at one of the first things to know regarding the financial side of things, according to NBC Pro Football Talk, where this information came from, looking at the Cleveland Browns, they owe Deshaun Watson $46 million in 2025. So next year, that's just guaranteed. They have to pay him that. Then in 2026, it's the same thing. $46 million in that year as well. $92 million guaranteed over the next 2 years. That is non-negotiable, right? Maybe you could do some salary cap gymnastics or anything like that to kind of reduce the hit, but you're still going to have to pay that full amount to Deshaun Watson, regardless if it's bonuses or just salary in general. That is all going to Deshaun, fully guaranteed, like I said. Then his contract, just in general, the way it is right now, will have a cap hit of nearly $73 million in 2025 and also $73 million in 2026, plus an additional $26 million if he's cut or traded, a clause in his contract. But what's the most interesting in terms of decisions comes there towards the bottom of your screen, because, with how bad it's going right now and just in general, other than this injury, you don't know how well he's going to come back off of this injury now as well, so that could affect your decisions. But before that, just based on the level of play, maybe in some Browns fans' minds, they were thinking, maybe we should entertain cutting him or finding another quarterback now, because this project clearly isn't working. Well, if you decide to cut him, if that is the ultimate route that the Browns decide to go with, they still have to pay him, and they'll have if they cut him, they still have to pay him, obviously, the $92 million guaranteed, but also, if they cut him before June 1st, it'll be a $172 million cap hit in 2025 next year if they cut him before June 1st. So I'm pretty sure that's more than what the Broncos have had to pay off of the Russell Wilson contract. So obviously that's not company you'd like to be in. But in an alternate route, if they cut him after June 1st next year, they'll have a $72 million cap hit in 2025, but also an additional $100 million cap hit in 2026. So the difference obviously is you spread it out a little bit more, or you take the entire massive hit from it next year if you decide to cut him before June 1st. And, you could say, what about trading him? No one's going to trade for Deshaun. And if they do trade for him, the Browns are going to have to give up a lot of draft capital, which I don't even think would make sense, because they'd be giving away a player and they'd be giving away a lot of draft picks, probably, if someone's going to even think about having Deshaun and having to pay him that much money based on his level of play and his injuries now. No one's going to trade for him. And again, if they do, the Browns are going to end up losing anyway, because they're going to give up a lot of draft capital. So I don't even really think that's a reality. So now you start thinking, maybe let's just keep him and do some, rearranging with the restructuring of his contract once again. And, you could do that, but still, you still pay him. You're still going to have to pay him that amount of money. So it would just go to bonuses instead of the cap hit. So what really are you trying to solve, or trying to gain from doing that? You're still going to have to pay him that amount of money. You could say that you could free up some cap space for additional players that you could have come in and improve the team. Well, if that's the case, Deshaun didn't look great when he was playing either. So if he's still going to be your quarterback, I don't know how confident you are in that, or the fans will be, if you're just going to run it back at some point next year with Deshaun. So that's one thing. Also, if you are going to get better, and you think you're going to get better, are you just going to run it back? So you try and find another quarterback. Maybe you think you're good enough to go out, find another quarterback, because you're going to have a high draft pick, right? If you bring back the exact same team, and maybe, again, you don't want to cut him, you just want to keep him on your team and just find another quarterback anyway, if you do find one, you're going to have a pretty expensive backup just sitting there, which, again, isn't a great look, because you're still going to have to pay him that money. And, it's almost like irrelevant. It's almost like a situation where you obviously don't want to have the most expensive backup in NFL history just sitting there. That's just something I don't see the Browns ever doing. And it's just like a big joke, really, at that point, that you're just having him sit there and still paying him a boatload of money. So that really doesn't look good on the organization as a whole. And it's also, to me, it's looking likely that the Browns start, fire selling everybody right before the deadline, knowing that this season is pretty much chalked. That why wouldn't you try and cash in on a Darius Smith? I know Jerry Jeudy just got there, but maybe you think about trading him, a defensive player, potentially. I don't know. I'm just like spitballing here, but if this season is truly done down the drain, why wouldn't you try and trade away a guy to get more potentially next offseason? Because if you keep your chips, you still could get a good player, but you're not going to get as many back to try and fix this as quickly as possible, because they're just not one player away. They're just not. And also, this is the last thing I'll say. We're not going to advocate for anybody getting fired, but what does this say about a guy like Andrew Berry, their general manager, right, who was probably a pretty big advocate, or a pretty big, had a pretty big role in acquiring Deshaun Watson, along with ownership and everything like that. For a mistake as historically bad as this could end up being, mistakes like this shouldn't and probably don't go without consequences. So, again, we're not advocating for anybody losing their job, but if you're going to fail like this historically bad, you start thinking about maybe one of these guys could be gone during the offseason or something like that, because this Browns team has obviously been looking for a quarterback, and now you waste or use so much capital and money to go and get the guy that you want, and it's a misjudgment based on him not being able to play, obviously health-wise, but also when he is able to play, he hasn't looked like the player you thought you were getting. So I feel like that has to be rectified somehow. Someone has to pay ultimately for that. So whether or not the Browns decide to make a move like that will be interesting to me, but it is usually how this thing kind of rolls itself out, if you will. But that is kind of the general idea with Deshaun going forward and how this situation could kind of play itself out. Money-wise and just, thinking of all the scenarios that the Browns are going to have to think about after this season and starting in 2025. But that is all we'll say on Deshaun. We would wish him a speedy recovery, hopefully, because that injury didn't look that great, obviously. But we're going to talk about some more reviews because there was a lot of games that I didn't really get a chance to touch on that were pretty good ultimately in Week 7, starting with the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl rematch in San Francisco against the 49ers. I was pretty adamant about the 49ers winning this game, and the way that they lost, I got some pretty strong feelings on the 49ers, so we're going to talk about that and also finish off today's episode with a review of the Texans and Packers game, another great game that we have a lot to say on, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping back into the action now and reviewing a couple more games that I had to talk about because looking at this next game that we have coming up, the Chiefs win the Super Bowl rematch 28-18 over the San Francisco 49ers. And this rematch, looking back at the Super Bowl, it wasn't that close in score, obviously, like it was back in February. The Chiefs entered this game as still the only undefeated team in the NFL, and they entered with a perfect record, and they walked out of San Francisco without a blemish on their perfect record with that 28-18 win. The 49ers now lose back-to-back home games to fall to under 500, and now they're sitting at 3-4. And just looking at this 49ers team, because this segment is going to be mostly about them, just the up and down season that they've had so far. We start off with a win against the Jets, then we lose back-to-back games against the Rams, and the other team is escaping my mind, but you lose back-to-back games after that victory with the Jets. I have it here. They lose to the Vikings, and then they lose to the Rams. Then you beat the Patriots. Obviously, you were going to win that game. Then you lose to the Cardinals. You beat the Seahawks, and then you lose once again to the Kansas City Chiefs just this past Sunday. And now, not only that, and how inconsistent the level of play has been, but not only that, you have injuries to deal with because Debo was, I think, diagnosed with some sort of pneumonia. He was hospitalized, I think, after the game as well, so he didn't finish the game, and basically, didn't play at all because of that illness. And also during the game, Ayuk suffered an ACL injury that is going to require surgery, so he's out the remainder of the year. And now you look at this wide receiver room and how really poor it looks right now, just in terms of who they have available. Plus you add on that Christian McCaffrey, you don't really know when he's going to play. So the outlook on this 49ers team is looking pretty dire. And that's why I felt like, regardless of all these injuries, we didn't predict that Ayuk was going to get hurt or that Debo was barely going to play, but still, the Chiefs had so many injuries themselves, with Pacheco and Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown and those guys not being able to play. And we look at the numbers, just the stats itself. Patrick, I believe, has thrown more interceptions than he's thrown touchdown passes this year. And the fact that they're still undefeated and still not playing relatively great, I felt like this was it. This was the chance for the 49ers to get a win over the reigning Super Bowl champions to kind of get this monkey off of their back. And for them to fall the way that they did, and I know they were still, the whole narrative is that, Brock just wasn't throwing to anybody. How do you expect him to win? Throwing to Ronnie Bell or these other guys, Ricky Pearsall, who just came off of that devastating injury that he had to deal with. But I would ask the same question to who's Patrick throwing to, right? Who's Patrick throwing to on offense? Because Juju Smith-Schuster didn't play either. It's basically Mecole Hardman, Noah Gray, Travis, but the 49ers still have George Kittle. And they just run the ball better than the 49ers do at this point. So if these two teams, if we're supposed to consider them equals, like they're two of the best teams in the NFL, and we can't hold them to the same standard when both of them are dealing with bad injuries and probably the same amount of bad injuries, then they're not equally the same team. They're not equally as good as we'd want to believe. Then the 49ers just aren't as good as the Chiefs are. And a lot of people don't want to admit it. I'm not going to say their Super Bowl window's closed or anything like that, but maybe just this year, based on the circumstances and everything like that, maybe they're just not as good as the Chiefs are this year. Maybe they're not one of the better teams compared to I don't know. I mean, looking at the entire NFC, I would probably take all three NFC North teams over them. I know there's four, but I'm not taking the Bears over them. I would probably take the Lions over them. I'd take the Packers over them. I'd take the Vikings over them right now. You look at the NFC East, the Commanders, I don't think they're that far off from each other based on how both of them have looked so far this year. And then I think it's close between the Eagles and the Falcons. I really do. I was going to mention the Bucs, but they're dealing with a lot of injuries, so I wouldn't say they're in that group anymore. But really, the Eagles and the Falcons, they're not too far away from the 49ers, if at all. So it just feels like something is off with this team. I don't really know what that is. Could it be a different defensive coordinator? There was a lot made of the fact that Steve Wilkes was fired, and a lot of people weren't happy about that. So you bring in Nick Sorensen, I believe. I believe Nick is his first name. I know Sorensen is his last name. You bring him as the defensive coordinator, and it just hasn't looked quite the same. Or it could be just as simple as no Christian McCaffrey, but still you have a lot of good players. I know there's a good amount of them injured right now after the game, but still with Debo, still with George Kittle. Even Jordan Mason has looked pretty decent. I don't think it could just all be that we don't have Christian, now we're looking like a 3-4 team, right? Because if that was the case, this team then I think we'd be diminishing the impact that all the other players have. So I don't think it can be just the fact that Christian's hurt. The injuries are obviously a big thing. We can't ignore that, but in this game, just around the context of everything, this team is still good enough I thought, to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, but maybe not. Then you look at the ongoing narrative, right? Maybe Brock Purdy's just not that good. And I'd like to give Brock some more credit. I don't buy into the whole idea that he's just on this sort of super team, because I feel like if that was so evidently clear, I feel like they wouldn't make it as far as they did, because he's had to make some pretty big throws. He's had to make some pretty big plays himself to kind of help the 49ers get to where they've been over the last couple years. So I don't really believe it's that. And then you look at maybe everybody else in the NFC has just gotten better. Maybe while the 49ers have just been running it back, albeit with a good team, maybe everybody else has just caught up. And now in this very unfortunate year for the 49ers where they're dealing with a lot of injuries, maybe everybody else is just a lot better, that they can compete with the 49ers and even beat the 49ers now that they have all their players injured as well. So it could be any of those things. It could be none of those things. But it's just really hard to pick out what it is about this team, because we look at the Chiefs. And another thing about the Chiefs in this game, it was like how they have all these players injured, right, passing game-wise. And, Patrick hasn't looked like himself at all this year. Like I said, he's thrown more interceptions than he's thrown passing touchdowns, but they're still the only undefeated team, the quote-unquote best team in the NFL, right, because they're still undefeated. And they've been able to mold themselves around this idea that, all right, we have all these guys injured, let's just become a running team now. Let's go and get Kareem Hunt off of the couch, bring him in, and look like he's been playing in the NFL. It looks like he's been our lead back for the last 2 times we've been to the Super Bowl, right? it's very uncanny what they're able to just plug and play and how creative they are in being successful with everything that they do. They hardly ever beat themselves. And, Patrick does make mistakes. He's made a couple of mistakes with these turnovers, right? But even still, when the moment comes, when they have to make those big plays or when their defense has to step up, it always feels like they make the right play. And Patrick, the plays that he made in this game were insane. And you can live with some of those. The run that he had on the left side where it looked like he was going out of bounds and somehow he stayed in bounds, had the balance to kind of pivot and just turn up field and go for another 15. That's as just unrealistic, as unpredictable as it gets from Patrick. So you can kind of live with that. But, you have him trucking people getting into the end zone. It's those type of things plus the running game that they have now that I think separates them from a lot of teams, right? Being able to just adjust on the fly like this. And the biggest thing is they hardly ever beat themselves, which is true. And I think in this game, the 49ers certainly had chances. They had a couple chances where they cut the lead down to 14-12. But after that, the 49ers threw back-to-back interceptions with the Chiefs scoring a touchdown in between both of those interceptions. So they ballooned the lead up to 21-14. And they threw another touchdown after that as well. So it's a missed opportunity all in all. I really felt like the 49ers had to get this win because now, like I said, you're 3-4. And in these big games where you have to have it, I think prove it to yourself that you still belong in these conversations. Because if you look at the games that they've played against the quote-unquote best teams, they lost to the Vikings. This was their really only other big game, considerably, because you had the Chiefs and the Vikings, who are two of the best teams. Everybody else, the Jets are 2-5, so that win doesn't really look so impressive. The Rams are also 2-5 or 2-4, I believe, as well. They lost to them. The Patriots are 1-6 right now. The Cardinals, I guess, but they lost to them and they're 3-4. They have the same record as them. The Seahawks are 4-3. They managed to beat them. I guess that one's pretty impressive. But then you get not blown out, but you lose by 10 points at home to the Chiefs. So just based on those results alone, to me it just says that you're closer to being to the Rams, or you're closer to being to the Cardinals, or even the Seahawks really, than you are being to the Vikings, the Lions, the Chiefs at this point in time. It's not completely over, obviously. I don't want to make it seem like I'm giving up on them, but this next game at home again against the Dallas Cowboys, they have no choice but to win that game because of the history between those two teams, because of how bad the Cowboys have been. They have to beat that team, because if they don't and they fall to 3-5 and lose to the Cowboys at home, that would really be a slap in the face, I think, to everybody in that organization. If the Cowboys, for how bad they've been and how bad everyone's talked about them this year, for them to beat the 49ers would be a whole different thing that we could potentially talk about next Monday. But for right now, that's where the 49ers are. It's getting pretty close to being full code red panic meter for them, but we're just barely hanging on by a thread. So we'll leave that game there, and we're going to talk about one more topic I wanted to get to, that being the Texans and the Packers game. It was a very entertaining matchup between two of the contending teams, I would say, in the NFL. So we're going to recap that and give my thoughts on it here to just close out today's show. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show to just lastly go over here our last recap before we officially move on from Week 7 and start looking forward. Actually, there was a bit of news that I wanted to show you guys. All right, the breaking news that just came in a couple minutes ago, the Saints and running back Alvin Kamara have agreed to a 2-year, $24.5 million contract extension, including more than $22 million guaranteed, according to the NFL Network's Mike Garafolo. And that was a topic of the offseason that we touched on like a month or so ago about what his situation was going to be this year, obviously, and how the running back market was, and the extension that McCaffrey got, and the contract that Saquon got. And then you look into this year now and how well Kamara's played. This could have been his last year with the Saints. It kind of looked like it was going to be that based on their reluctance to, at least at the start, agree to any sort of extension with him. But apparently that was not the case. They just extended him 2 years, getting about $12 million per year on that extension, give or take. So, yeah, I mean, the Saints, from what we saw in the first 2 games, they've been playing well enough through the running game with him that it would have been considered pretty surprising that they let him move on based on how important he is to that Clint Kubiak sort of offense. So, great for Kamara, great for running backs also to see another guy get paid like that. But we'll talk about that, I'm sure, more tomorrow. But in today's last segment, we're going to recap a little bit of this Packers win over the Texans. A great display from 2 of the most promising teams in the NFL, and it didn't disappoint at all. Much like the Lions, much like the Lions and Vikings game, I should say. No surprise that this involved another NFC North team, and the Packers executed on the fact that they had the ball last in this game to get a game-winning field goal in a 24-22 win. Green Bay now wins their 3rd straight game in a row, while the Houston Texans fall to 5-2. Both losses that the Texans have had have been the 2 NFC North teams. So I'm telling you guys, like, the NFC North is truly like the division. Like, they have the teams in it, and it might not be looking so convincing just because you look at Sam Darnold, the Packers maybe with a rough start, the Lions losing Aiden Hutchinson, but still, like, these 3 teams, I'm very confident in that they're going to be there towards the end of the year. But it was a close game despite all the injuries that Houston had, because they didn't have their tackle, Mario Edwards Jr., their linebackers, Al-Shaair and Henry. I won't even try to pronounce that last name, but you get the idea. Jimmy Ward didn't play. Nico Collins, we know, is out. And Kamari Lassiter were all out in this game for the Texans. But still was a close game. Even with a poor game from C.J. Stroud to his standards, right? And to Green Bay's credit, I'll say. But also more so that C.J., just overall, for the kind of quarterback that he is and the trajectory that he's been on, it was just not up to standards, really, for him. And looking more closely at what we're talking about, CJ had 86 yards, he was 10 for 21, and a big problem that we kind of saw boil over a little bit on the sideline was the protection or the lack of protection that CJ Stroud had in this game. We're going to talk about that more in a second, but it led to this 86-yard performance from CJ. Joe Mixon, though, another point that I've been making is that Joe Mixon, complete catalyst, complete X-factor type of player for this offense. With Nico out, he had 25 carries, 115 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Just exceptional performance from him. And receiving-wise, the player who had the most receptions was Stephon Diggs with 5. No other receiver had more than 2, and that was Joe Mixon. Every other receiver had 1 reception in this game. Tank Dell had no receptions in this game, and the guy with most yards was Dalton Schultz on the 1 catch that he had for 28 yards. So it's a pretty big miracle that the Texans only lost this game by 2 points, whereas the Packers, on the other side of things, numbers-wise, it looked a little bit better for them, because Jordan Love had 220 yards, two interceptions, but 3 touchdowns, and he went 24 for 33. Running wise, Josh Jacobs had 12 carries, 76 yards, and in the receiving game, Romeo Doubs had another great game. Dontavion Wicks, had a touchdown. Tucker Kraft had another touchdown, and Josh Jacobs as well had one in this game. Jaden Reed didn't really perform too well. Christian Watson only had 1 reception, but I think it shows the depth that they have with these guys. And the game played out a little bit weird, a lot more defense than I anticipated. Obviously, with 2 of the best young quarterbacks, we just read the stats out there. We saw almost everything in this game, starting with an interception on Green Bay's first drive, and then Houston only managed to get a field goal off of that, making it 3-0. And after a punt by each of them, Green Bay scored the first touchdown of the game by an absolute seed by Jordan Love to Tucker Kraft over the middle of the field. Now they're leading 7-3. Then Green Bay gave Houston another turnover in this game with a muffed punt, and that led to Joe Mixon's touchdown that gave them the lead 10-7. Then Green Bay did a good job of responding overall in this game because they scored another touchdown off of the Mixon touchdown to give them back the lead 14-10. And it was then the 14-13 score after Houston had got a field goal, but the turnovers that Green Bay gained off of another turnover by Green Bay off of an interception led to the second touchdown of the game by the Texans. Now they're leading 19-14 after they didn't get a 2-point conversion to go late in that game. And the second half was just pretty much all defense, because after the Texans went up 19-14, the Packers also got a field goal in there, and off of that field goal, they were able to kind of close out the game from there. But in the second half, other than the 1 touchdown on Green Bay's first second half drive that made it 21-19, there were 7 punts combined in the second half and only 2 field goals at the end, which is why Green Bay, was a bit fortunate that they got the ball last, but they executed a great 2-minute drill, and they benefited off of it. They won at home off of that game-winning field goal by Brandon McManus, who was playing in his first game for the Packers on Sunday. But now looking at the what we learned from this team and what can we take going forward, the biggest thing for me was that the top 3 teams are in the NFC North. In the NFC, it's the Packers, the Vikings, and the Lions. To me, are the 3 best teams consistently that I have seen so far through this year. And most of all, with the way this game played out, we talked about the interception on the first drive that led to the Texans' first field goal. That was one mistake by the Packers. Then also that muffed punt led to a touchdown directly after that by Joe Mixon. That was another mistake that cost them points. And it was another interception late in the game that led to another touchdown by the Houston Texans. If it wasn't for maybe for one or maybe even all these turnovers by the Packers, this game probably wasn't going to be close really in totality at all. And it was based off of that, we could look at the fact that, it wouldn't have been close, but the Texans were missing a lot of guys, which was fair. But this final scoreline, I think, was a bit deceptive just because of all those injuries and the fact that Green Bay is still a little bit careless with the ball. And I'd like to see them be more disciplined, obviously, because that needs to be fixed in these games that you're playing with such a fine margin of error that you can't just be turning it over like this willy-nilly. So that's something that the Packers obviously have to fix. But for the Texans, I didn't think the Texans would miss Nico Collins this much. And thank God they have Joe Mixon, because if they didn't, this would start to look, I think, a little bit concerning on offense, because I don't know what's different about this year, but with Tank Dell, he hasn't really taken advantage of the extra opportunities that I thought there were going to be there without Nico Collins, for him to kind of remind everybody that he was on a great pace to start his first year in the NFL. But he hasn't really taken advantage of it as much as I thought. And then the O-line continues to be a big problem. They're struggling to pass protect for C.J. Stroud, leading to some frustration. Their head coach, DeMeco Ryans, has mentioned it, and they're doing a good job run blocking. You look at what Joe Mixon's been able to do, but they need to be better in that aspect, because the last thing you do to any young quarterback is have pressure in his face and have him run endlessly, it seems like, in these games. And with all the talent that they have accumulated passing-wise, you can't be given about a second or a second and a half to throw the ball each and every time, or even less time than that. So that's something that they have to fix. That is something that, it's not, full panic mode yet right now. They're sitting at 5-2, and they're good enough to still stack up wins. But those are the two things that I noticed from this game. It was a great game overall, very close, very back and forth. And I think with, the Texans getting back healthy and the Packers playing a bit cleaner, these two teams are going to be there in the end, certainly. They're too good not to be. But we got a good taste of what they do well and what they still need to fix going forward. It was a good test for both of them that I'm sure they're both going to benefit off of going forward. But that is ultimately the last thing we're going to touch on today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. You can go check out the Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel on YouTube for more content around this show in a variety of different ways. But also, if you want to catch more of the live shows, you could tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time with me, Manny Mardiege, covering the NFL, all the storylines, breaking news, everything, discussions, debates, all 6:30 each and every weekday, back here again. And tomorrow, we're just going to get back to it again, talking about the Alvin Kamara deal, and I'm sure other pieces of news around the NFL before we already start looking at Week 8. So I'll see you guys back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.